After I graduated high school, I moved to a small city in southern Ontario, Canada, called Kitchener. I hated the idea of living in residence since I am not the most social person, so I moved into a house with 2 friends from home and 2 other guys that were already living in the house. I am a very independent person, so I thoroughly enjoyed having my own bedroom and bathroom. At this point, my boyfriend and I had been together for a year, and he wanted us to move in together. However, I refused. I love him, but I need my own space, and a lot of it sometimes. A couple weeks into the school year, I was invited to go out to a house party, not far from my house. I don't typically like going to parties because of my anxiety. I get very anxious being around a large number of people, but I decided to go and be a little social with some fellow classmates. I have not always got along with my fellow females. I find many of them exhausting to be around, so my main group of friends consists of mostly guys. I spend the majority of my time chatting with the guy I knew from my classes, Alan. He is similar to me in a few ways, and we bonded over a mutual love of the Legend of Zelda series. I noticed he brought another male companion with him to this house party. I didn't notice him hanging around at first, but eventually I felt his eyes burning a hole into me, and it made me a bit uncomfortable. I tried to be friendly and introduce myself to him, but he didn't say anything. I shrugged it off and just figured he was shy. When the guy that was there with Alan left for the bathroom, Alan apologized for his friend's behavior. "I'm sorry about Sean. He is actually a buddy's brother. He doesn't have a lot of friends, so I said he could come along." I reassured him that there was no reason for him to apologize. I could relate to Sean on that level and felt a little bit of sympathy for him. Throughout the night, Sean's behaviors did not change. Even when I was not around Alan, Sean would always stick at least 6 feet behind me, always staring after me. I felt it was time for me to leave, which I felt quite relieved about, thinking this should fill my social quota for the next couple of months. My boyfriend doesn't like the idea of me walking home alone, especially this late at night. He had to work early, so he could not walk me home. So Alan offered to take the walk since he knows my boyfriend quite well. Of course, since Alan was going, Sean came too. He didn't walk with us. He stayed about 10 meters behind us, which of course I felt was odd. But of course, I tried not to pay much attention to it. However, if you have anxiety, this is easier said than done. We made it to my house and Alan left as I was walking up my driveway. It was at this point that I realized Sean was not around. I didn't see him leave with Alan, nor did he walk me up my driveway. Again, I tried to not pay much attention to this observation, but of course it kept nagging at me, begging for me to give it my full attention. I fumbled with my keys and was about to put the key into the keyhole when Sean popped out of the bush next to my door. To say it startled me would be quite the understatement. I damn near crashed myself. Breathing heavily, he stared into my eyes and said, "Nice place. I'll see you later." And with that, he was gone. I hurried inside and locked the door quickly behind me. I went around to all the windows and doors, making sure they were all shut and locked. This is a part of my nightly routine, but I made sure to do it much slower tonight, double and then triple checking every entrance to the house. I went up to my room and my phone dinged as I received a notification from Facebook. It was a friend request from Sean. I ignored the request. Before I headed off to bed, my phone rang again. This time it was a message from a number I didn't recognize. I never answer calls from numbers I don't know, or texts, so I ignored it and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I had 55 text messages from this unknown number. I had my suspicions that it was Sean, but now I could confirm it. I was going to school for nursing at the time, and some of his messages were about him calling me his naughty little nurse, and now he wanted me to stick him with needles and then do it to myself. He would describe my body in great detail. I didn't reply to him. I blocked the number, but it made no difference. He would message me on Facebook, so I reported and blocked him. However, he would make new profiles and message me from them. This went on for a couple of weeks before it started to get much worse. I was heading back to my room after having a shower, and I noticed that I had a message from Facebook. It read, "I love when your red hair is wet. It looks like blood." My stomach felt like it dropped down to my feet. There is a small window in my bathroom. I have never felt so violated in my life. I had enough at this point and decided to call the police. I showed them all the messages he had been sending me from different accounts and numbers. I also told them about his most recent message about the shower. They went outside to look around the area around my bathroom window. What they found still disgusts me to this day. They found sperm all over the bush under my window. The police told me they would go and speak with him and left. I was furious they didn't do more. I head back into my room to see I have another message on my screen. "No one can save you now," it said. I have never felt so helpless in my life. Perhaps if more were done, it wouldn't have gotten as bad as it did. I didn't tell anybody about what was happening, especially not my boyfriend, not my parents or my roommates or my closest friends. Things started to escalate even more. He started to follow me home when I got off work, so I always had a coworker walk home with me, since he lived in the same area. I always knew Sean was there. I could sense him following out of sight under cover of darkness, eyes burning into me as usual. About a month later, my coworker had to go home early. He wasn't feeling well, and so I had to walk myself home. It had been a few days since I felt him follow me home, so I tried to tell myself that he had probably given up. It was a peaceful night. Beautiful. I didn't get the usual feeling that Sean was following me, to which I felt very relieved. Maybe it was finally over. I thought to myself, but boy was I ever wrong. Another benefit to having an anxiety disorder, in my case at least, is you become very aware of your surroundings. I know everything about my house and where everything is supposed to be. My roommates all went to their families' homes for the weekend, so I knew I'd be coming home to a fully locked and secure house. Walking up to the front door, I got this feeling that something was wrong. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything in the front hallway was in order. I walked into the living room where we had a sliding glass door leading out to the patio. It was then that I stopped dead and I noticed it. The sliding door was not locked properly. The lock on it is kind of hard to push down for it to lock all the way. When I looked at it, it was only halfway down, as if somebody tried to lock it but didn't push it down the rest of the way when the lock started to resist. It was at this moment that I literally froze with fear. My roommates left before I left for work, so I locked up the house myself. Even if any of them came back while I was at work, they never used the patio door since they have keys. Plus, they all know about the fight you have to have with the door in order for it to lock completely. I ran into the basement and locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. It seemed like hours passed by before I heard a firm knock at the bathroom door and heard a male voice saying, "Police, open up." I didn't move at first, afraid that whoever broke in was just trying to get me out of the bathroom. But I heard a muffled static voice from the policeman's radio. I opened the door to be greeted by 3 cops standing in front of me. "We found the man who broke into your house," said one of the officers. "He was hiding up in your bedroom." I didn't have to ask who the man was. Of course I knew who he was. I allowed myself to be led upstairs by the cops so I can identify the guy in the car as the guy who had been harassing me. When I looked into the car, Sean was staring back at me. He smiled maniacally up at me. "That's him," I said, softly to the cops. Before I turned to walk back into the house, I saw him mouth the words, "I'll see you later." I was told by police that when they found him in my room, he was hiding under my bed with a weapon. I didn't want to know the details about this weapon since I was already scared enough. There is no doubt in my mind that my life would have been ended had I not been as observant as I am. He was sent to jail and my life has changed forever. For somebody as independent as I am, changing into a person who is petrified to be by themselves concerned a lot of people around me. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone, not even my boyfriend. I never wanted to worry any of them, especially my family. I found out a few weeks ago that he was released from jail, and I received a notification on Facebook from him sending me a friend request. I worked at a seasonal gift shop restaurant last summer. It was on an island in Canada known as a vacation spot. The most popular way to get to the island is by ferry, so we have 4 rushes lasting 1 to 4 hours each, but the gift shop is almost always dead. While there were always mostly normal families, there were also quite a few weirdos. So the gift shop is completely dead, and I'm just sorting out the displays when a 40-ish-year-old man walks in. I'm going to call him Creepy Guy. I greet him and we chat a bit. I give him the usual spiel about asking if he needs anything and then continue sorting the shelves. A few minutes later, the man comes up from behind me and starts to stare a bit. Creep sensor's activated. Then he touches my shoulder and asks me a question and tells me I'm beautiful. Turning around, I ignore the remark and ask if he needs anything. He just stares a bit. I move over to the shelves, close the restaurant, and continue to stock. The shelf is accessible from either side, and he moves to the other side. I begin to move away and head to the restaurant where my boss is to tell him about the creepy guy when he said he wants to grab my hand, and he grabs it through the shelving unit and begins to spew this nonsense. "You know, you're beautiful." Me. Shocked silence. "There is nothing that would make you more beautiful," he said. Me. Begins to pull away, but his grip is tight. "You're almost perfect. You know what would make you more perfect? If you were dead. Death preserves everything, and if you were dead, you would stay just as beautiful as you are forever." Now, I don't really get surprised easily, but this guy just shocked me into the most unexpected silence. I rip my hand away now that this guy has relaxed his grip a bit as he continues to ramble on about death. I quickly walk over to my manager, who throws the guy out. Luckily, we don't end up seeing him again, but they have someone keeping me company for the rest of my shift. In 2003, I was working as a stripper in the Phoenix area. I had been dancing for almost a year and was still getting the hang of how to get the most money from a regular with the least amount of clinginess reciprocated. I was also working off and on at 4 different clubs. I'll be calling them Club 1, 2, 3, and 4 for reference, alternating day shifts and night shifts depending on money. One night shift. This skinny, scraggly looking guy comes into Club 1 and hones in on me right away. From the way he's bouncing and twitching in his seat, it's clear even in a strip club lighting that he's a meth addict and higher than my heels. No big deal. I was raised by meth addicts, and as long as he's happy, this should be easy money. We go to VIP, chat, and I relieve him of his paycheck, and he goes on his way. The next night, he's back again and looking for me. I get his name, Steve. I tell him my name, Tori, and my fake backstory and head back to VIP again. He tells me he's a truck driver and is only in town for a few days a month. We have a perfectly nice, if not jittery, time. No red flags. Everybody goes home happy, or in his case, probably sexually frustrated. Repeat the next night, then I don't see him for a month. This continues for about 4 months. He starts bringing in the finest gas station meth-addicted approved gifts when he comes in to see me. By this point, he is also serenading me half the time I'm dancing for him. His favorite was Picture by Kid Rock and Sheryl Crow. He sang it despite whatever song was playing. Thankfully, I spent a lot of my time with my back to him, and my ass don't have ears, so I could only hear snippets of his impassioned baritone. The singing was creepy, not just because it's on repeat. He's now gesturing specific lyrics at me. The longer he sings, the more grabby he's getting. Not anywhere illegal, but grabbing my face to force me to stare back at him. Intertwining our fingers to hold hands. Pressing my hand to his heart and trying to press his hand to mine. By the end of this month's visit, he asked me to move in with him. He tells me that he just wants to know I'm at his house all the time. Of course, he also envisions himself as the typical customer in shining armor. He's telling me he wants to save me, take me away from all this. I decide to be a little more honest with him and explain I have a girlfriend and I'm not interested in men or him, and that I'm happy living where I am. He tells me that he will let me keep my girlfriend. All he needs is to go down on me 3 days a month he's in town. I shut him down again. He starts begging me to think about it and he will come help me move in with him when he gets back next month. After this visit, I asked the manager to ban him. Unfortunately, without a pic of him on hand at all times, that's pretty much impossible. I settled for alerting the security guard, bartender and manager to give me a warning if he comes in asking again for me. When this time of the month comes around, I switch to a different shift at clubs 2, 3, and 4 to avoid him. When I go back to Club 1 the next week, he has left a couple of filled plastic grocery bags for me, full of notes scrawled on crumpled, dirty scraps of paper. Silk roses, small stuffed animals, panty roses, mismatched, taped together, greeting cards, and other detritus. There's a barely legible letter professing his love, an insistence again that I move into his place, and some poorly written graphic details of what he wanted to do to me. I was sufficiently grossed out and creeped out, and happily I had dodged his monthly visit. The following month rolls around, and I ditch what had become my regular club to avoid him again. I'm working the day shift at Club 2. Good money from lots of bored dudes on their lunch breaks. I'm getting to the last couple hours of my shift, and it's slow. I was on stage not really paying attention as I finished up my routine. I didn't see him until I was heading down the stairs to get off stage. He was a few feet in front of me, waving and starting to yell, "Tori," over and over. There was no way to get around him. As soon as I got to the bottom of the stairs, he grabbed me in a big hug. I was still topless from being on stage and didn't want him touching me. He wouldn't let go and kept grabbing handfuls of my hair and smelling it. I pushed away from him and started to tell him that my shift is over. That was my last stage, and I'm headed home. He looks upset and frustrated and says he just wants to hang out with me before he has to leave town tonight. I tell him that he will have to pay for me to sit with him, whether I'm dancing or not, and he agrees. I go and give the bartender and security a heads up that he's my creepy stalker guy, then go back to taking his money and attempting to placate him. Instead of me actually having to dance for him, he just has me straddle him topless while we talk. Not as unusual as it sounds, plus a nice break for me. He was unusually shaky and jumpy this time, so I resorted to making him sit on his hands. He proceeds to tell me how he went to multiple clubs looking for me this month, and how he asked various clubs if his girlfriend Tori was there. He tells me he has his house all cleaned up and ready for me to move into. I remind him again that I'm not moving in with him. He excitedly replies, "Well, you never know." I again remind him of my girlfriend who I was making plans to move to Canada with. He says he's in love with me and that our whole lives are about to change now that we found each other. Amidst all this jilted conversation, he's singing lines from Picture again and prodding me to sing along with him, like some weird romantic duet. Finally, despite the money, I decide he's just being way too crazy this time and really creeping me out. I tell him I'm done with my shift and I really need to get home. Before I can get off him, he suddenly wraps his arms around my waist, picks me up, and starts running towards the hallway that leads to the exit. I'm still topless, wrapped around this cracked out, skinny, scraggly, dirty trucker, while trying to flag down the bartender, DJ, or anybody because security wasn't there all of a sudden. He made it to the hallway and about 10 feet from the door when the absolutely massive security guard stepped back inside from walking a girl to her car. Steve tries to dart around him, and I'm reaching the security while Steve tries to pull me away from security and get me to the door. The brick wall of a security guard manages to plant himself in front of us and pulls me off of him before Steve can try anything else. He insists he was just joking and that he was trying to tell me goodbye. I bolted out of there and into the dressing room while he was still yelling for me to come say goodbye to him, as security practically carried his bony ass outside. Thankfully, he was banned this time. I decided to take a vacation with my girlfriend for a couple months after that, just in case he tried to show up in the parking lot of the club to stuff me in his trunk or something. He continued to call the club looking for me while I was gone. They lied and said I quit working there. When I was 13, I lived with my mom in one of two dilapidated apartments above a skate shop, in an otherwise hoity-toity Canadian ski town. My mother is a lovely person, but she was deeply depressed following the divorce. She was and is also largely uneducated because her parents, devout Jehovah's Witnesses, thought the world would end in the 1980s and didn't see the point in her completing much schooling. All this to say that when this story took place, she was working part-time for minimum wage in a grocery store and we weren't doing very well. We got most of our food from food banks, secondhand clothes from other Jehovah's Witnesses, and furniture from the garbage, and all we could afford to live in was this terrible apartment. And when I say terrible, I mean terrible. All of the floors were crooked enough to feel the incline. There was a balcony in the back, but we were warned to use it at our own risk, as it had never been maintained. We only used it in the summer, after I got a heat stroke. Fans by the windows weren't enough to cool the place down when temperatures hit the 30s. Celsius, and yes, it gets hot in Canada sometimes. There was a bright green monster crudely painted on the entirety of the bathroom floor. I took out my craft pants and gave it lipstick, pearls, and a purple dress, trying to make my mom laugh. We had separate beds, but shared the one bedroom. It may not sound too bad, but it was very rickety and damp, and you could hear music blaring from the store below all day. Our bedroom was at the back of the apartment. The front and only door led directly into the kitchen, where we also kept a shoe rack and a coat stand. To the right of the kitchen was the bathroom. Past the kitchen was our bedroom, with the living room on the right in front of the bathroom. The second apartment mirrored ours. I didn't pay much attention to the man living there at first, but from what I can remember, he was in his 40s. Big, bearded, and didn't look friendly. That impression was very much confirmed one summer night. Every once in a while, his teenage daughter would visit. They tended to argue, and Mom would usually tuck me into the bedroom with earplugs when the daughter was there. That night was different. Our windows were open due to the heat, as were theirs, and even I clearly heard their argument devolve into something much worse. I'll spare you the transcript I wrote out just now. My heart goes out to that girl, wherever she may be. Mom jumped on the phone, and the police arrived quickly enough, but it felt like forever, still hearing the beating and the cries. They took the neighbor away and informed us that he had several outstanding warrants and wouldn't be back for some time. Relieved, we went on with our lives. Church. Well, that was school for me at that point. Food bank, garbage, and church. I don't remember much from that year, if I'm honest. Months later, the neighbor returned. I don't remember if we saw him or just heard him going about his former routine next door. I just remember knowing he was back. It mustn't have been more than a week later when he broke in. I remember a noise, sitting up, a tall silhouette at the end of my bed, and heavy breathing. Mom jumped out of her bed screaming, swearing, and she never swore. Mom grabs one of her favorite heels, fortuitously lying nearby, and goes after him with the pointy end. She kept screaming and hitting and pushing until he was out of the door. We were both crying, looking around in a bit of a daze. Nothing seemed out of place apart from a candle that usually sat on a small table between our bedroom and the living room. It was on the floor now, and we were both convinced the sound of it falling was what woke us up. We hurried into the kitchen to tuck a chair under the doorknob, still unsure whether we had simply forgotten to lock up. Very improbable, or whether the neighbor had picked the lock. It was at that moment that I realized my feet were wet. Why were my feet wet? Mom was already on the phone with the police. I tucked one leg up and looked at my sock. Soaked. I looked around, and my eyes fell on the shoe rack. It was covered in piss, as the area around it. I shook my mom's arm and motioned at the mess. I heard her tell the operator he'd also peed in our kitchen. I heard the operator laugh. I was scared and now I felt ashamed. The police came to pick up the neighbor once more, and that was the last that we saw of him, as we moved not long afterwards. It's been 14 years, 9 of them on my own, and I'm still very, very wary of my safety at home. My current apartment boasts locks, chains, bolts, and even fancy magnetic doorstops. So, to the neighbor who abused his daughter, stood by my bed in the dead of night, and peed on our damn shoes, I hope I never have to see you again. I heard about this subreddit when watching YouTube videos. I thought I'd share my story, and I apologize if this is long-winded. I've read the rules and I hope this doesn't break any of them. I guess I'll find out if it does. Anyway, my father is not a good person and very likely a sociopath. He once threw a heavy object at his younger sister's head. I'll refer to her as my aunt from here on out. He claimed it was an accident, but my aunt knew it was on purpose. He got into hard drugs in his teens and remains a drug addict to this day. I don't remember much of him from my early childhood, but what I do remember isn't very good. Pulling up the skirt of my dress to expose my underwear when I was 4, for no other reason than to humiliate myself. Family members always told me that I loved skirts and dresses when I was little, but most of my childhood I can only recall hating them. I have to wonder if that had something to do with it. Other memories include him and my mom yelling at each other until she locked herself in the bathroom, and me putting my pet gerbil on his shoulder only for him to snap at me until I cried. But in order to fully understand the unsettling nature of the story, I have to go back to things I don't remember, or at least not in any kind of detail. I only know what my other family members have told me. My mom was 17 and my dad was 24 when they hooked up. To be fair, although my mom shouldn't have been allowed to do the kind of work she was doing at that age, she barely knew English, having moved from Quebec to Ontario, and I think her employers never bothered to make sure she was of age. Not that it would have been illegal for my father to have a relationship with her, even if he'd known her age, as the age of consent in Canada was only 14 back then. It's still only 16 now. Anyways, my father, the selfish person that he was, refused to wear condoms, and my mom had been told by doctors that she couldn't have children. It didn't take long before it happened, and for about the first year of life, things were okay. It wasn't until I was in my late teens that I learned my mom had become pregnant again shortly after my birth and had an abortion. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I learned my father didn't care what the doctor said about giving my mom some time to recover after my birth. My brother was born prematurely, a mere year and a half after me. When he was about 13 months, my Nana, paternal grandmother, got a call from my Mimi, maternal grandmother. In broken English, she told my Nana that my brother and I were alone in the apartment and she didn't know how long it had been. My Nana drove the 3 hours to our city and was horrified by what she found. My brother was in nothing but a nappy, crawling around on the cold floor and had a swollen gland in his neck that was ready to burst. I had a blank stare and was coloring on my bare skin with crayon. When one of my other aunts relayed this to me, she wanted me to understand that it actually hurts to color on bare skin with crayon. Apparently that's how gone I was. I'm not going to go into all the details of my brother's and my recovery and our Nana's care, but my brother didn't know how to be held and I was 2.5 and not talking. I would, however, scream at the top of my lungs whenever a strange man would enter a room I was in, and sometimes just randomly. My aunt, my Nana's goddaughter, says they were the worst screams she's ever heard. I was put into art therapy and drew pictures of houses with no windows in black crayon and people with disproportionately large hands. Later drawings featured various characters in chains, ropes, gags, and blindfolds. My brother, meanwhile, had night terrors for a while. Like I said, I don't remember whatever it was that traumatized me so badly as an infant, but sometimes I wake up late at night feeling very afraid for no discernible reason, and I retained a fear of large male hands until my mid-20s. I also have scars on both my inner thighs. No memory at all of where those came from. One looks like a scratch and the other like a clean cut. Fast forward to my teenage years. My brother and I had left our mom to live with our Nana again, and our father, our Nana's son, had claimed to be off the drugs and came back into our lives. It was a mistake for any of us to believe he could be a better person. He took advantage of my Nana, who was a cancer patient, and he and I used to clash a lot. He'd get my brother to search my room for any money I'd saved up when I was out of the house. When I later found out, I was livid, and he'd promised to pay me back, but he never did. He would show my brother and his friends really age-inappropriate things and get mad when any other family members put a stop to it. I remember he and I were in the living room once and had a pretty good conversation, which happened sometimes only because we were both intellectuals. Afterwards, he seemed to fall asleep and I just started reading a book. I looked over at some point for whatever reason, and he was masturbating. His eyes were closed and his pants were still on. I don't know if that was just a habit he had while sleeping, or I'm not sure I want to know. The house we lived in was fairly big, and my Nana often rented out some of the rooms. We'd fairly close to the couple renting one of them. My father was living in his own apartment by now, though he came around often. I was sick with the flu one night when my father got into a shouting match with the male renter. The girlfriend was crying and I wanted her near me, both to offer comfort and because I somehow felt safer with her near when men were yelling at each other. Thankfully they didn't get violent, but my father was going to leave and wanted to take me with him. I don't know why, but I got an overwhelming feeling of dread. I'd visited him before and nothing had ever happened, but I never felt safe there, always on edge. I was sick and not very assertive at the best of times, so I was just going to get along with it, even though my gut was screaming at me not to. Thankfully, the female renter put her foot down and said I was too sick to go, and I agreed. A few years later, my brother moved in with her father. It wasn't long till he came back, bringing their kitten with him, traumatized but refusing to give details. Shortly after, I learned our father had almost died a few times, but many years later, he still won't talk about that. The whole family has cut my father off by now. He's tried to seek out my grandpa, but nobody else, and now that my grandpa's moved and changed his number, my father has no way of accessing any of us. But here's the thing. I'd assumed when told about my early childhood that whatever had been done to me had been by my father's friends. I'd always known my aunt, my father's sister, had experienced some kind of abuse as a child, but never by who. A year or so ago, my aunt revealed it was my father who'd done it. I also recall a time when my father told me about a time that he assaulted a woman who was passed out. He'd make a big show of being against sexual assault, especially of children, but clearly didn't walk the talk. He hadn't drawn the line in his own little sister, so it's not a stretch that he wouldn't stop at his kid either. Given that, and the many borderline inappropriate comments he's made to me, and everything I've detailed so far, I have to wonder if it wasn't just his friends who'd done whatever to me as a baby. And given that overwhelming intuition I'd felt that it wasn't safe to spend the night at his place when I was sick and incapacitated, I have to wonder just what would have happened if I had.